I remember having my first story published and it felt so good that having that little dose of confidence just made me say, okay, well, what else could I do now? When I look back at my career, I'm not that person who would have called myself an ambitious person. I was always a really hard worker and I always really wanted to do a great job, and I knew that I would be successful at something, like whatever that something was. But I wasn't necessarily like, I'm going to be president of the United States, I'm going to be CEO, I'm going to like rule the world kind of person. But I do think that, you know, as I've looked back on my career, I do think it was ambition. I think that I had an idea of like, I wanted to be something bigger.
You were named editor-in-chief of Allure in 2015. You took over from Linda Wells, who was the founding editor, had been with the brand for 24 years. How did you navigate that in terms of your own personal growth?
It's a hard dance to try and figure out, I need to make my own stamp, I need to like, you know, change things, but to also then look back at what's been done in the past and make sure that we're honoring that. It's like, I love culture and I love reading about culture, and I think the fact that as a magazine editor, as a media editor, as an editor-in-chief, that we can have an impact on culture is really fascinating to me. So it's funny to think about in the past 2.5 years that I've been at the brand, how much has changed in beauty and fashion now, and I like to think that we were one of the driving forces with that. We became the first major women's magazine in the States to feature a woman in a hijab on the cover. We famously declared last year that we were banning the term anti-aging. Looking back at the history of not just Allure, but just women's publishing in general, diversity was not a huge priority for anybody.
I read that you said that, you know, growing up you weren't a thrill seeker or, you know, did crazy things, but in business you would consider yourself a risk taker. It might be calculated risk, but you're still a risk taker.
A lot of us, including myself, are pleasers. I want to make everybody happy. I don't want to make anybody upset with me. And I think for a while I was going on in business feeling that way and just wanting everybody to be happy, everyone who worked with me to be happy, but also the entire audience to be happy. We can't operate in that way. Like, we have to, as journalists, just tell the truth, first of all, first and foremost. But then also, we do have to have perspective on things. And the essence of perspective is that there's going to be two sides, and someone's going to love it and someone's going to hate it. So at a certain point, I started to just be like, well, that's totally fine. Like, I'm not going to care as much about what people think.
Not everyone's career ladder is straight up. You know, there's opportunities to rise and there's opportunities to have setbacks and failures along the way. When you think about your career, what was one or two of those moments where you did have a stumble or a setback?
I'm hesitant to call them failures because I don't think that they're failures. I think it's more, it is like those stumbling blocks that you come across. And it's true, in the moment, it is gut-wrenching and it's so hard and you feel like, you know, there's no way I'm ever going to get through this. But I think I have a strong survival instinct. I think part of it is that...
was that born or nurtured?
I think it was part of, I think it's a bit of both. I didn't grow up rich. I didn't grow up with a huge amount of like contacts within media or anything else. I knew going into it that I would have to work extra, extra hard. And in fact, my dad, when I was growing up, I remember being really little, and he would tell my sister in this a couple times, that because we were women and because we were Asian, we would have to work twice as hard as anybody else. So I think that that's something that has really stuck with me. And honestly, I've gone through times in my life, like when I was younger, I had so little money that I remember scrounging in like old purses trying to find change to buy a sandwich. And I think that because if you go through those instances of not having a lot and knowing just the value of like what hard work can bring you, even when things are going well, I never take things for granted. Like, I definitely am always like, I have to keep the hustle going.
People look at the career that you've had and the role that you're in now and see someone who is very, very successful. How do you define success?
I think that when I was younger, I would have viewed success almost more as like a monetary thing, right? And I think that a lot of people tend to do that, like, you know, once I get this money and once I get this title, I will be quote unquote successful. For me at this point in my life, I want to have a life too, and I want to enjoy the work that I'm doing. I don't necessarily want to feel like I am just working all the time. But I think the key to that is finding a job that doesn't feel like work. So I feel like that because I get to engage in culture and beauty and fashion and everything else that I love, I feel like I do have this element of success that someone who is working and toiling, you know, 80 hours a week in a job that they hate doesn't have. I think that being able to work really hard at what you do, to be able to enjoy your life as well, is truly success.